Okay, thank you very much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be able to share a moment of dialogue with all of you, especially in this period. Your issue today is a restart, and I prefer to imagine and wait to start over and on to start again. I like very much the presentation of my colleague Angel and Thomas, because in one way they talk about the subject of the time. I think so, starting again, renewing puts on the place a relationship with the time and with our time in various dimensions, which becomes hour and hour of what was happened, of what we have not understood just this moment, or wanted to understand today. For this reason, I will speak to you about time today, the meaning of the words, or also one kind of the words of fragility, feeling, gaze, and generosity. I think this is interesting to think the time has a possibility to change, and I like it is this idea in one book of Voltaire, is Candido, is they have one particular vision of optimistical. It's very strange optimism in this book. I think this is interesting in these two words to understand how the meaning is the best is built with intention and effort. Because for me, the relationship with the will and therefore an idea of responsibility and sometimes an idea of the time and the idea of the effort is one idea. Also the action of the project is the idea of the fatigue is one of the measure of the time. I think one of the problems today for our society is we lose the relationship with the time. And what's I mean for me time, for example, is a very difficult question in one way. I try to explain our vision. In one way, there is one very connection by the Greek culture. There is two types of the times for the Greek. In one way, there is the kairos, is the time as a propitious moment, is the time for the opportunities, for pragmatism and vision, for courage and hope, is the time for the action, is our time when you decide. And but immediately when you think the time of an action, we have immediately one action for to change in the time all our action. Another question interesting is the other idea of the time, is the time of chronos, is the time of eternity, is the time as eternity is the time of wisdom, is the time of looking, is also in the contemporary vision is the slow time alongside the fast time, is the last 20, 30 years, is the time of responsibility and the teaching. But these two times we must to work together. But in another way, I prefer another book, is The Confession of Saint Augustine. It's interesting because also in another presentation is every way the idea to talk of the time about the present, the future, and the past. In Saint Augustine, there isn't this idea. There is the creation take place over time as a sum of the present. The past is an idea of the memory, but is the present. And the present is an action where they're paying attention to something. It's a very direct of our action. And the future is the waiting. This condition, I think, is very important today with our complexity to make understand. Okay, when you talk of the future, we talk of the present in a very this condition. The first action to create a relationship with the time, with the project for me, is the look, the act of the seeing. But today, just the last centuries, perhaps there is only the reality of reference for us. After we have the perception of the reality. In the last 20 years, there's the virtual dimension to create one relationship with the reality. And today, also, how you live in this moment, you are isolated but connected. There are not a fourth dimension to have one perception of dimension of reality. But if you see the reality by the perception, it's interesting, for example, to understand what all of you see in this photo: the water, the river, a collective, the religious space, a public space, the colors. I see water and the community, for example, it's my perception. But it's interesting if you change, you look in this area, and you see how there is not a strong sense with another picture in the same place, of these values or in a more intimate image, because where they have the figure of a body, but you don't see the woman, they have the color of the dress, they become one with the water. For me, it's very intensive, it is perception. The two pictures we give another important dimension. The dimension everywhere is important by the collectivity, community, and the intimacy. But if you change, for example, this exercise is possible to make everywhere you perceive, you read, you see the reality. In this image of South Italy, the Amalfi Coast, we discover another landscape. What to see in front of us? The nature, the artifice, stratification, architecture, invention, all of you is possible to see. Another way, you stay in a collective place. What is the modality today to see the reality? What is the dimension of reality today, real with the time? And for example, this anonymous image. It's interesting because with the perception, it's possible to understand how the volcan, very quiet at this moment, angle, not problem, just at the moment, on a volcan, very, very good. It's possible to understand this is Naples. This is the trees, you might understand, you stay in Mediterranean area. And there's a little architecture, is one very context. But this is my imaginary, for to understand. It's by the perception. And now there is another possibility to see everywhere, the reality. If you analyze the condition, if you see, for example, this picture, this is Venice, this is Amalfi, this is Genoa, this is Pisa. And it's interesting because I think all of you, they imagine this picture is the picture of the last month during the lockdown, because this is a very impact in the moment. Our perception, when you see this picture, you understand there's one kind of time. But it's not true, because this is a work I asked my friend Marco Interini around the 4 Repubbliche Marinare in Italy for the Biennale Architecture. But it's interesting how we reflect the reality with one event by the time, and you see one picture very linked by the time. I try to explain we must everywhere, if you want to imagine the idea of the future, we must to return the idea of equilibrium by the perception, by the cognition, everywhere to understand what you see or what you want to create a project. It is a condition of equilibrium, it's very important. And for me, the equilibrium is everywhere and intimacy and the community. We live the last 2 months where we have invested the condition. Our house will become one collective space with the connection, and the public space is void. It's interesting to make understand how also in this condition for society we understand this. But it's not the question of the present. In this work of Didier Fiusa Faustino, is architect Parisian and artist, we talk in the last 2-3 years so much around the idea of the time and the body. It's very interesting to understand how there is one sensibility where the idea of the emergency, there is a real, but it's not where very question of the present for discussion to understand what to decide for the future. But we are front row seats for this threat of mass destruction. In the last past, very recently. It's another perception. This is a work by Didier, but is 3 years ago. It's interesting because perhaps it's possible to see this image of the present. There is the man alone, but connect with the technology. And there is one device for divide the environment, perhaps dangerous, I don't know, and intimacy. It's very strange to make understand why this is very real in the last 2-3 years. We are not have a sensation from this question. It's interesting because this reflection, we are right to think, why not? If in the future, I not hope, but in the future is to divide this condition, to looking for everywhere one sort of artifice for looking for an equilibrium by the nature and the city. But I think the points of reflection for us is in this words by Peter Roderick. The construction of Iceland is the inverse of our habitat. I think the last century, all city will be construction by the Iceland. It's not longer a question of setting a building within the environment, but of setting an environment within the building. We must to change the paradigm. We must to change the condition for to arrive at to looking for one very equilibrium in ideal project. And for me, we translate this in the project with the two words. Is the responsibility, is the will, is the reason, is the pragmatism, the vision, and the generosity is the research by the dimension of intimacy and the dimension of a community. Generosity by the public space, como we talked Angel before, is generosity by the idea of the city. It's very important because if you don't see this, today it's possible to leave all people with the anxious to find the final solution and not to work with the time, step by step, for to understand. It's not change all. It changes the idea of the see, of the perception of the reality. We must to work in this idea of a balance of the time. Because for me, the first important things is reflect together what we are, because we think we have forgotten what we are. And for me, we are territory, we are the landscape, we are city, we are reason, will, we are architecture, we are intimacy. All of this picture is from my town, is Genoa. We are matter, lights, history, time. We are imaginary. Is the only modality for dialogue with the people. And we are feeling. So this is my office at this moment in Genoa. It's interesting also in one man of Leonardo da Vinci, he writes in all time, every one of our connection starts with feelings. It's important. I think what is not ever in the last 20 years is the idea of the feelings. But the architecture and the feelings, for me, I believe in these words, in architecture of feeling, not in a sentimental architecture, in architecture of feeling, action, and will, reaction, relation. It is very important to understand this because how is possible to dialogue not in between the architecture, but with the people, with the society. Only for me, if it's architecture before beauty, before aesthetics, before space, is the encounter between the imaginary and the real. Because all our people, we have the imaginary, the only way for to dialogue with the reality. And this condition is very important. This picture, for me, is a very stratification of the idea. With the phrase, the words of André Breton, the imaginary is what tends to become real. The real and imaginary is the modality to things. And in this way, it's possible to give one idea very important for the model of architecture. The model of architecture is to create the community. A model of a building is a material body that socializes. It's very, very important for us at this condition, because we must to understand this for the last 2 months. We are fragile, and sometimes we are unable to understand what it's possible today with the capacity, technology, what humanity we have, is not possible to understand what's happened. But the idea of the fragile is important, because being fragile does not mean being weak. We are not eternal. Fragility is our essence. We must not be destroyers, but builders of the world. And this is my reflection for this question. I think it is very important to introduce an idea of generosity. Generosity is the idea of the public space. Generosity is to work with the time. Generosity to work with the matter of the place. For this question, I finish. I will see one sort of the measure or project where there isn't the problem of the scale. Everywhere in our project, everywhere we try between architecture and the relationship with the public space. We're looking for a different dimension or function or program. Everywhere we give one idea of generosity by the public space, also in a private project. Also when one tools will become an idea of the project. And every way we try to create one landscape in the landscape. Every way we try to dialogue with the lights. Every way to try to dialogue in different way in a different context. Every way we try to work with the idea of a context, also see the context brutal, for to create a very idea of architecture where the architecture will write the space. Every way to looking for how it's possible to invent the space by the existing. For the idea of create identity, for example, in housing, with the matter, with the condition of the corner of the building, on simultaneously with the time, where intimacy, a collectivity, a community, every way is a part of the language of architecture. I think this is a part very interesting today. It's possible also to have this point of a dialogue of all different cultures, because the time, the lights, the matter, the intimacy, the community is one way in all parts of the world where it's possible to talk this. Every way we talk with the soul of the project, soul of the city. And I think we must to return at this idea of the time, because also with the time, it's possible to understand why one project is very important to give one transversality, one porosity, one permeability, to link very well the different functions, to utilize the words to translate the idea of the project, and to give identity for the intimacy of the project in a different way, when a project will give one tools for the perception of the area. So I finished my presentation. I would like only to talk around this subject, because I think it is important to dialogue together around the idea of the time, especially in this idea, I try to do tomorrow is the yesterday future. Thank you very much.